Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished representatives of member states from the permanent missions in New York, dear colleagues of the UN system, African think tanks and academia, ladies and gentlemen. I deeply apologize for arriving late due to circumstances beyond our control. I would like to welcome you to this meeting to launch the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa's flagship report entitled Financing for Development in the Era of COVID-19 Pandemic, the Primacy of Domestic Resource Mobilization. This report could not be more timely, as the world, and especially the African countries, recover from multiple crises: COVID-19 pandemic, energy and climate crisis, as well as the impact of the war in Ukraine. Mobilizing adequate financial resources will be critical to ensuring Africa's inclusive and sustainable recovery and building forward better. The report will shed light on the challenges of DRM in Africa and help us in understanding the opportunities offered to African countries to further mobilize additional financial resources and take ownership of their development agenda. We therefore have an exciting agenda before us. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Ms. Cristina Duarte, the Undersecretary General and Special Advisor of the Secretary General, will not be able to join us today, and she looks forward to the fruitful outcomes of the meeting. I will start by delivering my opening remarks in my capacity as chair of the African Group. After the opening remarks, we will have a brief presentation for about 10 minutes on the key findings of the report by Mr. Kavazewa Kajumuis, Senior Economic Affairs Officer and Team Leader at the UN Office of the Special Advisor on Africa. Then we will have a panel discussion comprised of distinguished panelists from representatives of member states, the United Nations system, and from academia, bringing a diversity of perspectives on the issues to be discussed. The panel will be moderated by Mr. Liwadine Fleece from OSAA. So at this stage, let me make my remarks. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, once again, good morning to all of you. I wish to start by thanking Ms. Cristina Duarte, the Under-Secretary General and the Special Advisor on Africa, for inviting me and associating the African Group to this event and for our inspiring leadership. I am most pleased to welcome you all to this launch event for OSAA's 2022 flagship entitled Financing for Development in the Era of COVID-19, the Primacy of Domestic Resources Mobilization, produced by the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa. This report is timely and important. It comes as most African countries are still recovering from the socioeconomic repercussions from the COVID-19 pandemic. On top of that, we must add other challenges posed by the geopolitical tensions and the energy crisis. As many of you know, the pandemic caused a 1.6% contraction in the continent's GDP in 2020 and wiped out many development gains achieved in the last 2 decades. Measures to limit the spread of the pandemic and support vulnerable households and business in Africa have led to significant decline in revenue collection, rising fiscal deficits, and debt accumulation, thus exposing the underlying weaknesses in the continent's economies. Although the regional economy has rebounded in the past 2 years, the rate of recovery is far below what is required to set the region back onto its pre-pandemic growth trajectory. Africa's financing gap is further aggravated by the ongoing war in Ukraine, rising commodity prices, and energy crisis around the world. Over 640 million Africans have no access to energy, corresponding to an electricity access rate at just over 40%. The commitment by developed countries to collectively mobilize $100 billion per year by 2020 for climate action in developing countries has not materialized. This leaves African countries to shoulder the burden of climate change and natural disasters, despite contributing the least to greenhouse gas emissions. African Development Bank's Africa Economic Outlook 2022 estimates that financing African countries nationally determined contributions will require up to $1.6 trillion between 2022 and 2030. Collectively, African countries received only $18.3 billion in climate finance between 2016 and 2019. This leaves a climate finance gap of up to $1.288 billion annually of US dollars from 2020 to 2030. In the context of huge finance needs faced by African countries, OSAA's flagship report makes a very important and timely contribution to the discussion on Africa's financing for development and the steps forward. The report shows that despite the popular belief that Africa is heavily reliant on external financing, the continent's development is largely financed by domestic resources. However, this is inadequate to close the huge financing gap. As the report rightly recognizes, meeting the magnitude of Africa's financing needs would require fully harnessing all the potential sources of funding. This report underlines that domestic resource mobilization is the key underpinning a more resilient and sustainable part of development for Africa. Priorities highlighted in the report include strengthening revenue mobilization, improving public spending efficiency, leveraging the large pension fund market and sovereign wealth funds, curbing illicit financial flows out of the continent, as well as harnessing the potential of regional and global partnerships. OSAA's flagship publication sends an urgent and pertinent message that the new narrative of Africa shall place the continent at the driver's seat of its development in order to improve social and economic resilience against future shocks and ensure a more sustainable path for Africa's development. While we welcome the report's emphasis on domestic resource mobilization as key to self-sustaining development, external financial resources, including ODA, foreign investment, and others, will continue to play an important and complementary role in financing Africa's development. In this regard, Africa's development partners will need to meet their aid pledges as well as improve the effectiveness of aid. I wish to thank OSAA for their excellent work to bring these issues to the attention of the UN member states. I hope this event will serve as an opportunity to encourage discussions on the important issue of domestic resource mobilization for Africa's long-term sustainable development. And I thank you. After these opening remarks, we will have a brief presentation for about 10 minutes on the key findings of the report by Mr. Kavazewa, Senior Economic Affairs Officer and team leader in Office of the Special Advisor. Then we will have a panel discussion, as I said before. And after that, we will have an interactive discussion for about 30 to 35 minutes. So we hope to wrap up our program by 11:30. Please note that there is simultaneous interpretation in French and English. And since this is a hybrid event, I want to remind those who are following us on Zoom to please mute your microphone unless you are given the floor. So I would like to give you the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good morning, good afternoon, Excellencies, representative of member states, colleagues from the UN system, ladies and gentlemen. I'll present key findings of our report. And let me start by answering the question, why the focus on financing for development? The cascading and intersecting global crisis from COVID, energy and climate crisis, as well as the war in Ukraine, have considerably widened the financing gap for Africa's development. According to the IMF, African countries will need between 518 to 719 billion in additional financing for investment in physical and human capital just to place the continent on its pre-growth trajectory and income convergence path with advanced economies by 2025. These crises have also exposed the vulnerability of African economies to external shocks, and therefore to strengthen the resilience of the economies, African countries must break with the past and look within, relying on domestic resources for sustainable development. As we can see from the chart, African countries have made progress in mobilizing tax revenue over the last decade. The tax GDP ratio rose from 14.8% in 2010 to 16.6% in 2019. Yet Africa still lags considerably behind other developing regions in terms of revenue collection. The comparable ratio for Asia was 33%, and for Latin America and the Caribbean, 27%. Despite efforts undertaken over the years to mobilize tax revenue, the tax base remains narrow. And because the tax system is regressive, the burden of taxation falls on very few, mainly individuals and small and medium enterprises. Weak institution and governance are also important factors adversely affecting domestic resource mobilization. The report identifies modernization and digitization of tax collection systems as critical to boosting domestic resource mobilization. African countries that have gone this route, such as Ethiopia, Rwanda, have reaped enormous benefits in terms of mobilizing tax revenue. The report also identifies that the fiscal incentives that a number of African countries extend to foreign investors to woo them to invest in the continent cost billions in tax revenue. For example, the IMF estimates that the foregone revenue due to fiscal incentives amounted to 46 billion in 2019, roughly 2.5% of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP. Of course, most of the time when we talk about domestic resource mobilization, the focus tends to be on the revenue side of the budget. But the report underscores that priority consideration ought to be given to poor public expenditure, which divert resources away from the budget. IMF shows that African countries are more inefficient compared to other developing countries. For example, the average efficiency score for Africa was 0.583 compared to 0.825 for non-African countries, with one being perfect efficiency. Losses from inefficiency of public spending amounted to roughly 12 billion for education, 30 billion for infrastructure, 28 billion for health, representing a combined annual loss of 2.8% of Africa's GDP in 2019. Therefore, increased budgetary allocations may not achieve the desired outcomes, especially in the context of large inefficiency. Now, Chapter 3 of the report discusses the importance of private financial resources. Now, despite decades of financial sector reform, the financial sector in Africa remains underdeveloped. For example, the ratio of domestic credit to the economy is low, around 30% for Africa, compared to 54% for Asia and 45% for Latin America and the Caribbean. Despite substantial growth in assets and profitability, the banking sector in Africa tends to be risk-averse, preferring to hold government securities instead of extending credit to the private sector, especially the small and medium enterprises. We also discovered that the national and regional development banks, which play important role in providing financing, especially long-term financing for development in other parts of the world, in the case of Africa, they have not been able to play an effective role. The report also identified the pension fund markets as an important untapped source that could be leveraged for development. For example, the assets of pension funds grew from around 675 billion in 2017 to 1.1 trillion in 2020. However, most of the pension funds' assets are invested abroad. And we recognize that if African countries are able to allocate at least 2.8% of their assets to infrastructure, this will be able to generate an additional 20.9 billion per year for infrastructure development, reducing the infrastructure financing gap by around 30%. The report also identifies sovereign wealth funds as another important potential source for financing for development. Chapter 4 of the report discusses illicit financial flows. And according to the African Union High-Level Panel on Illicit Financial Flows, or the Becky panel, there are three main sources to IFF in Africa. These are commercial and tax-related IFFs, which account for around 65% of total outflows, followed by criminal activities at 30%, and corruption-induced illicit financial flows at 5%. Illicit financial flows out of Africa have grown substantially over the period 2008 to 2018, peaking at 129 billion in 2012. Between the period 1970 to 2018, Africa has lost a combined 2 trillion through illicit financial flows. These represent a severe constraint to domestic resource mobilization and financing for development. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development estimates that capping IFFs out of Africa could close the financing gap by more than 33%. Now, the last chapter of the report discusses partnerships and identify key partnerships at domestic, regional, and international levels. At the domestic level, it is important to involve civil society and other key stakeholders in development, as these contribute to increased domestic resource mobilization through strengthening efficiency and reducing corruption. This must be complemented by measures to modernize tax collection system and simplifying customs and registration procedures. At the regional level, the report identifies partnership to facilitate the cross-border infrastructure investment, and this will be important to unlock the benefits of the CFTA, as well as partnership for harmonization of financial and banking regulations to facilitate cross-border capital flows. At the international level, the report identifies the need for international partners to honor their commitments on ODA, as well as addressing the effectiveness of aid. Improving international cooperation through exchange of information among jurisdictions to reduce profit shifting and base erosion will be also important. Now, in terms of policy recommendation, the report provides a comprehensive list of policy recommendations, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to highlight a few. One, modernizing and digitizing tax collection would contribute to increased domestic resource mobilization through improved efficiency of tax administration. There's also a need to tackle inefficiency in public expenditure by eliminating waste and leakages. Third, there is a need to rationalize tax expenditures by eliminating unproductive fiscal incentives, and also the need to strengthen international tax cooperation to stem illicit financial flows out of Africa, and the need also to increase aid allocation and better target it to those areas that can have a transformative impact on Africa's development. And lastly, of course, the importance of addressing systemic issues in line with the Addis Ababa Action Agenda to strengthen voice and representation of African countries in institutional global governance. In conclusion, based on the analysis presented in the report, one can conclude that Africa does not have a money problem. The challenge, rather, is Africa has not been able to fully harness all its potential sources of funding for development. It is high time to fully mobilize all our resources for our development. That will be key to ensuring a better future for Africa in a post-pandemic world. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Kabazewa Kajumuis for this important and insightful presentation, and for setting the stage for our next discussion. I now wish to invite Mr. Liwadine Fliss, Program Management Officer from OSAA, to moderate the panel discussion. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Having heard this very insightful presentation about the key outcomes of the report, so I have the pleasure to introduce the panel, which is composed of distinguished representatives of member states, UN system, and the academia, to discuss the theme of the report. And the panelists will be bringing their perspectives on how African countries could really give primacy to domestic resource mobilization to finance their development. So today we have 4 panel members. So the first one is His Excellency Claver Gatete. He's the permanent representative of the Republic of Rwanda to the United Nations in New York. So he previously served as the Minister of Infrastructure in the Rwandan cabinet. Prior, he served as Minister of Finance and Economic Planning from 2013 to 2018. He has also served as the Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda and as Rwanda's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Iceland. Joining us virtually on the Zoom platform, we'll have Mr. Paul Akiumini. He's the Director of the Division for Africa, Least Developed Countries and Special Programs at UNCTAD. So he previously served as the Director of the Economic, Social, and Development Affairs Units in the Executive Office of the Secretary General in New York, and also the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Deputy Secretary General. He also held appointments with UNEP, FAO, and also in ECA. We'll have also Mr. Fode joining us virtually. He's a former UN resident coordinator in Rwanda, and also he's a member of OSAA's sound board that helped the office in conceptualizing the report and reviewing it. So Mr. Ndiaye, he recently retired, as I said, from the UN Resident Coordinator System. He has 40 years in the field of leadership and management for finance and development. And also he has been a public speaker and has many publications, including on finance and development. So also we'll have Ms. Irene Odida. She's a member of the UN FACTI panel and the Mbeki panel, and also she's a member of OSAA Knowledge Network. So she is also on the Independent Commission for Reform for International Corporate Tax and member of the South Center Tax Initiative Steering Committee, and she's also a Pan-African Lawyer Union Task Force on IFF. So as you can see, this panel is composed of distinguished members, and then they will help us into looking at the key issues discussed in the report. So I know that we are already behind time, so we'll try to start quickly, and then I will be asking 2 questions for each panelist, and then after that we'll be opening the floor for Q&A session from the floor here. And then for those who are joining on Zoom, please put your questions on the chat box. So we'll be picking them from the chat box, and then we'll be asked to the panels. So before starting the panel discussion, also we always remind all those who are joining on Zoom to mute your microphone unless you are giving the floor. So my first question would be addressed to His Excellency Claver Gatete. So effective domestic resource mobilization is essential for obtaining the financing required to effectively drive the continent's economic growth and development in an inclusive and sustainable manner. And Rwanda has made significant progress in raising domestic resources for financing its development. So as a former Minister of Finance, could you please share Rwanda's experiences in this regard? Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator. And it's good to see Fode back. Fode was a wonderful UN resident coordinator in Rwanda. I had promised him that he can't part with the UN system. I'm glad that he's here now. How much time do I have?
You have 3 to 4 minutes for each question.
Yeah, because I could go on forever. So thank you so much for this. Yeah, I want just to give a brief on the revenue side. I want to give a brief on the investment side and also on the expenditure side. What we went through in terms of reforming our domestic resource mobilization sector is quite a lot. But with our vision and where we intend to go in terms of development, we wanted to see how we can eventually be independent of any external financial support, except where we are issuing bonds for our own development. So our key targets in the medium term were simple. We wanted to uplift our revenue to GDP ratio from where we are to around 25%. And also the investment to GDP ratio to 30%. That's where we wanted to be in the medium term. And then eventually it would be exactly where you reported in terms of Europe being over 30% or close to 30% within the Caribbean. So what we did was a few things. In terms of the tax reform, we had to do simple things. There are simple things that make a huge difference. One, we had so many taxes at the central level, at local government level. So we had to go and did an evaluation of all those taxes that were really a burden to ordinary people that we never knew. And then removed all those, we called it nuisance taxes. So we removed all of them. You could go to any market, you could go to any local government, and then you could see actually people are suffering. They are paying a lot. They are being taxed almost forcefully. So we had to remove all those nuisance taxes. And we are left with very clear taxes that are known to everyone, that are competitive in the region. You could go in the whole East African region and you see that really we are competitive. You could see on the African continent, on the global level, and we are left with the taxes that were known to everyone. Then secondly, we also had to bring in the informal sector. We are finding that actually we are taxing a small population of the country, and meaning we are putting all the burden to big companies, to medium-sized companies, to SMEs that are registered. So we had to bring in so many that were out there, but were not in the tax bracket. And when we did that, to bring them in, giving them tax holidays, assisting them in terms of capacity building, we saw actually more taxes, and that would give us room in terms of reducing even the burden on the big companies. The other one which we did was to make sure that we do it properly in terms of registration of all the businesses. Everybody has a tax identification number in the country. Whether you own an asset, whether you are paying taxes or anybody, we did that kind of exercise to make sure that we know our base, which is also very important. The other thing which was critical, I'm sure that most of you, when you go outside here and you buy anything, you will see a receipt coming out from the cashier that includes the taxes that are being taken out. In our countries, initially, we didn't have that, meaning you have to know the people, we have to understand the businesses, and you have to trust that they're going to pay taxes. That trust, when it comes to paying money, is not always assured. So what we did was to introduce the electronic billing machines everywhere. And you can do it on the phone, and you can pay electronic, at least bills. You can bill anyone and give a receipt to anyone electronically. So it will go on the smartphone, it can go on your own computer, it can go anywhere, but now whoever it is that is doing any kind of business at least has the electronic billing machine. That way you are assured that you don't have to run after anyone asking what kind of business they did. You can see actually the taxes being removed. That way increase our revenues significantly. The other thing that we did for that, to encourage the people, is to make sure that we give the tax incentives, the fiscal incentives they are talking about. How we did it was different. We have to make sure that why are we giving these taxes? We expect this number of people employed, we expect revenues from here, we expect this. what is promised by the companies. What we do, we have the Rwanda Development Board, which actually goes to verify whether what we thought we would get is what we got. If not, then you remove the incentive. That way, then it helped us to understand, because initially they were taking advantage of us. We would promise, and they can promise anything because they know government is not going to follow up. So that way, then they get away with it. And this one, for us, we had to do it also the other way around. And I think also what we did that has been very useful is to computerize the entire tax system. So the tax evasion or anything else, and this one is linked, by the way, to also the other kind of company that you have that works with the banking system, and you can also track the transfers. So that one helped in terms of knowing exactly who paid taxes, who got what revenue, which expenditure, when did you start, when. So computerizing the whole system helped. And of course, as an incentive, each year, I think last week we had one, we have Taxpayers Appreciation Day, chaired by the president. We celebrate, we give certificates, we give awards to people who have done very well in terms of paying taxes. You don't have to be a big one, you can be a small one, but we appreciate that you are a person who have played by the rules and you are an example to anyone else, including in all categories. So this has really provided an incentive. Now, on the investment side, we had to make sure that really the investment that we think about, we had to go through it. I remember this took us quite a long time. Number one, we provided investment incentives. So we have an investment code that specifies exactly what incentives for the investors who are coming to the country. It has so many things I can't go through it, but among them, for those who are external, one of the things that made a huge difference was when we passed the resolution that that all the foreign investors can repatriate their profits without any problems. Whatever profit you make in the country, you can always take it out anytime that you want. Nobody took it out when you passed that one. People were worried that everybody is going to take their money out of the country, but nobody did it because they were guaranteed that anytime they want to take it out, they could take it out. The other thing that we did was, in the country, as a government, what reforms should we make? Because, by the way, in any country, there is a lot of money because individuals have money, companies have money, other people from outside have money. There are people who don't necessarily have to open an industry, but they want to invest. So you have to put the facilities that would allow them to invest. For us, we started with, of course, the small ones, the unit trust, the Rwanda National Investment Trust. Once we put it there, it's for everyone to put in money. Now it is actually giving interest rate of about 12%. 12% in terms of return, which has encouraged everybody almost to save. We have another one which is, I don't know, they call it Ejo Heza, meaning the bright future. That one is for the people who are not getting regular income, including the farmers and others. It's like supplementary pension. But then they give certain conditions on when you can withdraw it, or if you are paying like school fees, if you are purchasing a house, if you can use it for mortgage, and things like that. And this one, because it is so flexible, and initially government will match whatever you put in, for the first few years, and then you'll be on your own, and this is your money. This one has helped in terms of increasing, and it is managed domestically as well. We also had, of course, there is the pension fund that is there, but also we started the sovereign wealth fund, which is initially contributed by the population, but has now grown significantly. And in order to facilitate that, we had to reform the financial market. We had to introduce the stock exchange. Once the stock exchange, the reason for that, just to simplify it, it is a mechanism where ordinary people can just invest their money, get just a return. They don't have to keep it in any other way. Once it is in the stock market, it means the companies which are putting in the shares, or the government which is mobilizing bonds and all that, can access this money. At the end of the day, all this money is kept in the banking system. It makes the banking system liquid. It brings in long-term resources because it's not where you can go and withdraw your money. Once you have bought stock, you can only sell it to someone else. So this financial sector was very, very critical. We have the commodities exchange. Commodities exchange buys from all the farmers in terms of various products, beans, you have maize, you have other things. And what they do is They purchase your produce and they give you a receipt, meaning before they pay you, what they call warehousing receipt, you can take it to the bank and cash it out and start doing the investment without necessarily waiting for the season for you to sell your product. So the commodities exchange was very, very important. We also established a financial center. It's called the Kigali International Financial Center, where we can bring all the funds here. Let me tell you that now part of my mandate here is not to do the work in this building. It's also to make sure that I can work with the financial institutions in the Wall Street to make sure they can establish at Kigali International Financial Center. It is an international financial center where we are now having 70 companies registered. They have funds. The money is there. They are looking for projects to finance, not only in Rwanda, but also on the African continent. That way, there is money from the people that go into the stock exchange, that go into these saving schemes. And also, this helps in terms of the people to be able to invest because there is now a huge resources from the country and also from the outside. And for the stock market, we have also linked it because we want a big base. We have linked it with East Africa. Now there is a system that is helping like East African trading platform that is linking Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda, financed by the World Bank, meaning you can do cross-border trading from the whole East Africa, and this one now would encourage other people from outside to be able to invest in our region. Eventually, we may have one stock exchange as a region, and this will be more attractive to bring in more money, especially from outside. Now, this brings in the long-term resources which have always failed because for the capital markets, for the other things, but also how reforming the Development Bank of Rwanda, mobilizing resources from outside through the Development Bank, which is providing long-term resources, which is very, very crucial. On the spending side, I'm just conscious of time. On the spending side, just few things which have made a big difference for us. The PPP, the public-private partnership, has become very, very critical. And how we do it sometimes, we make sure that we partner with the private sector because they fear risk. And once we do that, we also make sure that we also help in terms of mobilizing resources for them to invest. Let me just give you an example. I'm sure Fode is here. He understands the project in Kigali City of providing the entire water system. So what we did was to divide the cake. We said, tell the companies, for you, you concentrate in building the plant, the water treatment plant. That way, you have a contract with the government, okay, the one that is in charge of the water. And then for us, we'll do the piping. So those providing the piping to all the households and all that, it's a big project. We borrow money from the ADB, from the African Development Bank. So we are borrowing the money, but also we tell the African Development Bank, also because you are partnering with this private sector, you also need to use the private sector window to lend them so that we have one big project. That way then, they get money with our help, but also we borrow money and we know that the project is going to be completed. So that kind of PPP, and we have done it also with the World Bank and others to make sure that we share the burden. Otherwise, the government, because it's a public good, would have put all the money in that kind of project. But this time, we are paying 40% and the company is paying 60%. So we are sharing that kind of burden. So that's what we do with many things. The other that we are doing is, this time I was in charge of the infrastructure, and I was also one of the people who are doing the structuring of this kind of finances. We are saying, rather than give me the budget to invest in a road, to invest in this, to invest in that, why don't we sit down and evaluate and see which projects can be done by private sector if we did the risking? So now, once we de-risk, we take on the risk part, and then the private sector will invest. Now, also it becomes attractive if a project has no risk at all to bring in the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds, the insurance funds, and so many others that usually do not want to really take the risk of any kind. So this way, you bring them in to make sure that they can take that kind of burden. What you provide is like less than 10% or 10% of the entire resources. Take off the risk, rather than for me financing it, the private sector will come in. And also what we did, other thing is, in terms of accelerating our development, what we do, there is, if you see in the city of Kigali, and I think Fode knows this, we are now, second phase is 250 kilometers within the city. How do we finance it? No penny from the government. We are doing the pre-financing because we know that the company is there, They are the ones to take that kind of, to construct. They do a pre-financing arrangement. And then we know that once you build the roads in the neighborhoods, the value of the houses will go up. We know we are getting the money from the increased money from the taxes. So that way, the ordinary people are happy, the company is happy, and when you combine these increased resources with the money from the road maintenance fund, it becomes much easier. Road maintenance fund, initially when the road is new, you do less of the maintenance. So that way, that money is structured in such a way that it can pay back the money of the investment. We also do the municipal bond, which we have now finished rating the companies that have the clean audit to make sure that they can now borrow for infrastructure development with a clear way of how they are going to pay it back. So that those ones are well supervised. The other thing is, for government spending, any penny that is spent in government, you can see it in the system, the integrated financial management system. For us, from procurement, at any level, from local government to central government, up to the final payment, it is in the system. Nobody's going to do anything outside that kind of system. It's not acceptable. So that way, then, it is efficient, and then you can be able to see it. And of course, this goes with the public accountability, the audit of everything that we do, and also taking action with that kind of audit. So the Auditor General's report is the most popular one for the donors, for the government, especially for the parliament, who are holding the government, the executive, to account. And we have always made sure that any government borrowing from outside, because it comes in hard currency, it has to be dedicated mainly on the productive sectors, because the productive sectors is what actually increases the GDP. One of the things that we have done also to make sure that, and you mentioned the capital flight. You know, I'm one of the people initially, because we didn't have the capacity to manage the resources, some of the government reserves that we had were being kept. For example, my colleague here from Zambia has been in the World Bank. There is a program called RAMP program, which is the Reserve Advisory and Management Partnership. We would send there, pay for it. Our money is not used in the country. It's managed outside, or it is managed in Europe for first-class banks. And then from there, we don't see the money. All the pension funds are also managed outside. All the other resources of the banking system are also managed outside. So what we did here when we are creating the Kigali International Financial Center is also to build all the capacity that we need so that everything can be managed within the country. And that way, then, it means that we can now bring back the money, we can retain the money, and this money, once it is managed in the country, doesn't sit there. It is invested. So, and once we create an environment that allows this, then you get more resources in the country which can help to grow, and eventually you can graduate from external support. Maybe let me stop here, but if there are any questions, I'm ready to provide more questions.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Indeed, this is a very rich experience, and as you mentioned, we could stay the whole day discussing it, but unfortunately we don't have the time for that. But sure, I think we'll find a time for this in future opportunities. So let me go now to our second panelist, so Mr. Paul Akumini. So I will ask the first question, which is, as Kavaz presented, so one of the findings of the report is about tax incentives and how these taxes are ineffective in attracting FDI to African countries. So according to you, how can African countries rationalize the use of these incentives, and what are the complementary measures needed to ensure their effectiveness? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to thank the previous panelists and speaker. It's always refreshing to hear hands-on experience and knowledge of, on-the-ground knowledge of how countries actually dealt with these things. I think one of the issues that we are all cognizant about is that FDI does play a role in the country's economic development over time. And But we must also recognize that getting FDI does not entirely depend on tax incentives. It also very much depends on the fundamental economic conditions on the ground of the country, the local economy, the market size, access to skilled labor and materials, raw materials. So generally, the investor is looking at two-stage process. He first evaluates investment location and climate, and then secondly, very much is the tax incentives and what tax incentives they are for him to invest in the country. But I think before we go into that, we must recognize now that there are new global initiatives which will impact the way governments look at the tax incentives they want to provide for foreign investors. One certainly is that it's the new EU Commission 15% minimum corporate tax agreement that all African countries have signed, except I understand Kenya and Nigeria. So that will have an impact on how they look at this equation. And the second thing is very much is the whole climate debate going on right now, and the new generation of environmental standards that are going to be imposed on member states who want to import into the EU. This is the carbon border adjustment mechanisms, which are going to make production of goods and services more expensive for African countries if they want to export into the European Union. So in that context, when one's looking at the tax incentive, one has to look at within that context, and also to look at in the context of the debt sustainability of the country. We know a lot of countries are going through debt stress right now, so one has to look at it in that context as well. So these are critical areas that one has to look at. I think also what is important is that we recognize that most of the FDI is coming to the traditional areas, which is infrastructure, mining, it's oil, it's also apparel and textiles. And here we have to ensure, and the previous speaker mentioned that it's important to ensure that in order to get the tax incentive, you have to fulfill certain things. But it's important also that it's not about just fulfilling certain payments and so on and so forth, but it's also important of backward linkages into the local economy. I think one of the question marks which we often come across when we do a lot of research with not just African countries, countries as a whole, is that the tax incentives and the incentives given to FDI multinational firms are not the same incentives given to the local firms. And it's critical to build the capacity of the local firms so that they can enjoy some tax incentives as well, and other incentives so that they can grow and also help with the country's diversification and the diversification of the economy. But not also that is to build, to be able to produce goods and services, move up the value chain. So this is also very critical. And it's also very critical in relation to the CFTA right now as well, as countries need to be able to trade with one another and produce goods and services. And that leads me to another point, which is linked to the tax incentives also, is the ability of local firms to borrow, the borrowing rates, the interest rates. And in many African countries, the interest rates are extremely high. So the question is, can they even compete with those international firms when they don't get the tax incentives that borrow at higher interest rates? Can they actually compete? And the important thing about supporting the economy is to be able to diversify the economy and build the national capabilities of goods and services. So it is important that we bear this in mind when we look at the tax incentives. In some countries, we've discovered that there are tax incentives, very much tax incentives for multinational firms to come in economic zones. And the tax incentives are there, no tax for 10 years. After 10 years, you will then pay an additional 10% after 10 years, and so on and so forth. So it is staggered according to what they like. But we've discovered there are many loopholes. And in many of these economic zones, the companies will change their name or change their structure after the 9th year. So they start from zero again. And this is accounting tricks that are going on. So it's important that those lessons are learned for the new incentives that we're going to give many of these companies that are coming in. Secondly, a lot of the economic zones, the money to build these zones are borrowed by the government. So it's important that they are able to retrieve these loans. It's important to have a business plan on how they're going to pay back these loans for the construction and for the services that they've put in place. And this is critical. We've seen this in many countries where they've borrowed and they cannot pay back the loans because they have given tax breaks for 10 years. And they're realizing that they're not getting the tax breaks. The companies are sold after the 9th year, and they're really not accumulating the wealth they should be to be able to pay off this. So see, these are some of the issues I think that are important that need to be amplified here. And I'd like to say this report is extremely timely and important because any report that emphasizes a holistic approach to domestic resource mobilization is critical, that we keep on emphasizing the challenges and opportunities of this. And I think there are other areas that we can look at. We talked about the pension funds, and we also talked about sovereign welfare funds. We've seen in many African countries, the previous speaker absolutely correct, a lot of the pension money is invested outside. But it's also because the policies, the government policies and policies within the country do not allow them to expand their areas where they can provide assets to. In general, the pension funds are focused on securities, on real estate, and in banks. Whilst it's important that they're able to invest in other areas, they're able to look at fintech, they're able to look at other securities, they're able to look at commodities and property and private equity funds. It's critical that they expand that base. And a good example of this is in South Africa, where they have a regulation on pension funds, which sets out the investment limits per assessment. So it broadens that base in which the pension funds can actually invest in the structural transformation of the country. And this is a critical area. And I think when we have the CFTA, it will be a great place to start harmonizing the pension funds investment regulations, that more of the pension funds can actually invest in the countries themselves so that they can benefit and move towards green structural transformation. So I would like to end it there and be very concise. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akwemeni. So in the interest of time, I will be moving to Mr. Fode Ndiaye. So Mr. Fode, OSAA flagship report emphasized that transformative change that will ensure a better future for Africa can only be achieved through African-led initiatives and supported by novel and strengthened partnerships at all levels, national, regional, and global levels. So what types of partnerships do you think are needed for African countries to support their domestic resource mobilization efforts and change the financing for development narrative? Thank you.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you to USG Duarte and Kaza and the entire team. It's always a pleasure to see my brother Nyakubava Gatete, and I enjoy every single second during my time in Rwanda. Thank you very much. Turikumwe, as we say there, and Abishize Hamwe Nakibananira. So thank you very much, Minister Gatete and my brother. And I think I would not have spoken after you. It's very clearly, and Paul as well, my brother, and it was very clearly elaborated. Let me take a different angle. I think, as I said, that Africa is not, the issue is not lack of resources. I totally concur with him. My angle now in seeing Africa's development, I think we need to have the right mix between leadership and management. That's what will move Africa forward in its development. For example, regarding the issue of partnership and domestic resource mobilization, it will be all about trust, social contract, managing risk, and making sure that Africa's money is invested in Africa. You mentioned the sovereign fund. Many of the sovereign funds are invested outside Africa. And at the same time, we are asking, as the money including paying more incentives on that. Number two is when you look at the capacity, the fiscal capacity, it's totally linked to the level of development. Therefore, the vision of having a transformative economy of Africa will unlock really potential for Africa to mobilize domestic resource, both public and private. Number three, I think we have a tool that we are not using very well. And I'm happy that Rwanda was among the 15 African countries, globally, in fact, that really tried to design and implement integrated financial framework. Because I do think that we need to have a comprehensive approach to this if we really want to harness the domestic resource in our country. Number four, I think that the report has made my task very easy. The table 4 of the report has aligned all the elements of partnership, national, regional, and global partnership. So I just want now to make it concrete based on the table that they have put forward. I think that we need more capacity in really mobilizing public finance. It's first increasing and improving the efficiency of spending. It was mentioned. And if you are losing resources, it's like you are pouring water and you are losing water. So you never fill up the bottle. So the spending is important. And there I see a very strong partnership between civil society organization, citizen, the private sector, the NGOs, and the banking sector in looking at how we can make sure that there is a transparency, and my brother Gatete mentioned the audit report there, of all the oversight institutions that will be looking at how we are spending money. But it started on how we allocate money based on the priority of each country on the budget. So this partnership, in my view, is very important. Second, on the capacity aspect, there are a lot of programs ongoing. And I think there we have program with ATAF, we have program with other regional tax authorities, we have program with the World Bank that is supporting the African, authorities, tax authorities. We have even for IDA 19, the Global Tax Program, which is supporting that. And that's also an important aspect on capacity. But me, I really believe on peer learning. Ambassador Gatete mentioned really important stuff that is done in Rwanda. And I think other aspect of other countries doing other stuff is important in this peer learning aspect. Number 5, I think, which is important in my view, which is how we as African, we are really looking at being serious about our commitment. If we look at the CADEP, we say that we need to put 10% of that, our spending on agriculture. And yet only 5 countries, including my own countries, which is Rwanda, is really putting money there. That's important aspect that we need really to look at when we are looking at this partnership. Another element which is important on partnership and looking at the management of waste is the illicit financial flows. I have written a paper on 10 eyes to curb illicit financial flows for development on Africa. There also we have initiative ongoing. I think the STAR with the World Bank and other regional organization is important in that respect. We have also the OECD Tax Without Borders. We have the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes. We have the Committee on Experts on International and Tax Matters. We also have the Transparency International And that's also important in really looking at the way that we are not wasting money in Africa. Corruption is a key issue, and partnership is important as well there. And we have the UN Convention Against Corruption, which is important to be implemented by all countries, which is not happening really, and that's an important aspect that we need to look at. Six, what I'm seeing, which is also an important aspect in the way that we need to deal with public DRM, is the aspect related to the economy. Technology would be very important, and partnership with digital enterprises, including startup and global enterprises, is important in order to modernize the tax authorities, in order, as my brother Gatete was saying in Rwanda, the way that they are doing in the Rwanda Revenue Authority with the digitization, which is important in really making sure that we are not losing transaction and we are controlling transaction. That part is important, but we also have in that respect the OECD G20 initiative, which is 137 out of 140 countries have signed off on that. And that is also looking at how we can tax 15% of enterprises that is having more than turnover of 750 million. That is a huge amount. And we know that in Africa, this only the mobile aspect is having 110 billion turnover. That is could be mobilizing more than 16 billion on new taxes that we could support there. That's also an aspect that we need to look at the partnership. And this partnership should be really between the UN, UNECA is important player, the World Bank, the OECD, but more importantly, regional institutions like ATAF and other institutions like the Addis Ababa Tax Declaration Partnership. That is important in that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now,
thank you very much,
for the sake
Mr.
of time, let me conclude.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr.
Yes.
Fode. Sorry to cut you short because
Okay.
there is no time. And then, actually, you talked about the issue of illicit financial flows, and then the importance of curbing these flows. This introduced the next panel member, Ms. Irene Odida. So one of the issues that were highlighted in the report and also in the presentation done by Mr. Kava is the importance of stemming these flows for Africa's sustainable development. So as a member of the UN FACTI panel, what are the major challenges and opportunities for implementing this recommendation, Mrs. Irene?
Thank you very much. Coming last, it makes my task easier because a lot of ground has been covered by the previous distinguished panelists. I would like to speak to the issue of illicit financial flows and also the recommendation in this very good report on the need to have an international framework dealing with global taxation under the auspices of the UN. I think that's a very timely recommendation, and the launch of this report at this time is also timely given what is going on currently within the UN in relation to the proposal for a UN tax convention or a resolution for the UN to start negotiating a convention on international tax. So the challenges, there are a lot of challenges related to international tax reform, but there are also opportunities. And I'll just try to summarize because of time. The biggest, what we do need to understand is that the current system that we have of international taxation, the international financial system is connected to the international financial system, which itself is linked to the global economic system. And the imbalances and the asymmetries and the flows of the latter, that is the global economic system, and the international financial system are also reflected in the international taxation system. So we have a current system at the level of the international financial system that enables multinationals and the ultra wealthy to abuse tax, either through tax evasion or tax avoidance and other BEPS practices, so base erosion and profit shifting by multinationals. And the cost of this per annum has been estimated at $483 billion lost or parked in tax havens. So there's a huge impact therefore for countries, and developing countries are affected the most because of the small size of the economies and also the structures of our economies, which are heavily dependent on corporate income tax. And that is reflected in the low rates of taxation that have been mentioned by previous panelists. So what are the challenges of reforming this? And there have been attempts for many decades and many years to reform the international taxation system. The challenges that we have currently, I would say, are really fall into 3 or 4 broad areas, and there are lots of details, but I will not go into them. The first broadly is really political, that achieving reform in the multilateral system, particularly of issues relating to taxation and allocation of taxing rights between countries, is a highly political thing. As the current system really benefits and advantages rich countries or advanced economies, which same economies have a primary role in setting the rules of that same system. So the rich country power, the rich countries benefit from the current system, the status quo in the global taxation. Their power is harnessed to ensure a retention of a privileged position in relation to global taxing rights. Another challenge that is also political is that achieving reform is resisted not only by countries that currently benefit from the system, but also by global elites. So large corporations or multinational corporations and the wealthy who benefit from the current regressive tax system also resist this. And so their lobbying power is applied to resist reform. The exclusive global governance that I mentioned, and which has been highlighted in the report of the Secretary General of the UN of this year, where he stressed that much as there are global forums, and the last speaker has alluded to some of them, although there are a number of global forums, FATF and others that deal with illicit financial flows and addressing the issues of illicit financial flows, the BEPS process itself, the governance within those forums is not universally inclusive. And so the Secretary General's report this year highlighted that even the most inclusive of those forums only accommodates is only about 75% representational of the countries of the world. The BEPS process under the OECD is even much less so. Although it has a number of jurisdictions, an analysis that we did at the South Center indicated clearly that at the level of agenda setting and determination of decisions and management of the processes, there is very little representation of developing countries. And in fact, the jurisdictions that are cited as members of the BEPS process, not all of these are countries. Some of them are actually overseas territories and dependencies of former colonial powers, which heightens their power in decision-making because they vote together heightens the power and decision-making of the former colonial powers that still have control over many of those overseas territories and dependencies. For Africa, it's a huge challenge because only about half of African countries were members of the BEPS process. So when we look at the number of African countries which have signed up to it, that does not include the countries that were not part of the process, which are about half of the African countries. And 2 significant African countries are Nigeria and Kenya. Nigeria in particular played a very strong role in participatory role throughout the process. Those ones have not signed on to this, which is a reflection of the flows within the BEPS deal. Other challenges, and I'll move on to opportunities because of time, are organizational. That there is a need to strengthen coordination and collaboration of countries in order to influence better multilateral processes and also to address the asymmetries built within those processes, such as the BEPS process, that do not give equal say and equal accountability to developing countries. Overall, in terms of the challenges, I would say it is really short-term thinking, because the reality is that the flows in the international taxation system do not only affect developing countries, but also affect developed economies, as evidenced by the impact of losses of IFFs by those countries as well, even though overall IFFs flow from developing countries and Africa in particular to advanced economies and thereby boost those economies, their currencies and so on. So ultimately, the international financial centers where IFFs typically flow to are either located within the advanced economies or in areas such as in Caribbean that are controlled, that are dependencies and territories of advanced economies. And there's a lot of research that has been done around this. The FACTI report itself highlighted that. So what then are the opportunities? I think the increasing recognition of the impact and importance of addressing illicit financial flows and harmful tax abuse is really critical. The role of the Mbeki panel, led by His Excellency Thabo Mbeki, in reframing the understanding of IFFs and emphasizing from our findings that 2/3 of the problem, or 65% of IFFs from Africa, actually come from commercial illicit financial flows related to trade and tax abuse, including tax avoidance and base erosion and profit shifting activities of multinational corporations. So framing this so that there's a clear understanding that commercial IFFs need to be addressed. And considering that at a global level, the architecture to deal with IFFs has been more focused on the corruption aspect and the criminal aspect, money laundering and things like that. While the commercial that accounts for 65% of our losses in Africa is much less developed. And instead, we just have what the Secretary General referred to as a patchwork of treaties and measures, which leave loopholes that are taken advantage of by multinational corporations and the ultra-wealthy. It is also a further challenge that patchwork that we have has not been updated. We have a system that is about 70 to 100 years old. And so it has not taken cognizance of changes such as digitalization and globalization of multinational productive systems. So it definitely needs reform. So what are the opportunities? So that recognition is one. There's a better understanding of IFS from a technical perspective, and there's momentum that is being built as a result of some of the measures, the interventions and initiatives taken at a political level by the global community, but also especially by Africa. So I mentioned the Mbeki panel, which resulted in the special declaration on illicit financial flows, adopted unanimously by heads of state of Africa in 2015. That special declaration on illicit financial flows from Africa of 2015 represents the policy position of African governments, of African members. And that has been taken forward into the global space through recommendations made by the FACTI panel, which I was a member of, but that have also been taken on board within the UN system. Two things I really would like to mention that are important for this leadership and political momentum. In May of this year, African finance ministers met and issued a call, passed a resolution under the auspices of the ECA. They issued a call for the UN to start negotiating a UN tax convention. That was then taken up in October this year by the African group in New York, which His Excellency, who's chairing this session, is part of that, taken over. And so we had a resolution proposed in the second committee of the UN in October with Nigeria as a spokesperson calling for a UN tax convention adopted within the second committee with some modifications, but now in line for adoption by the General Assembly in plenary in December. And that is something that is really critical. Secondly, there was a resolution by the G77, also in the second committee in October, on illicit financial flows that captured some of the issues recommended by the FACTI process around the policy platform, what we call in the Becky panel, the ABCs of tax transparency. So things like ensuring automatic exchange of tax information, beneficial ownership transparency, and country-by-country reporting by corporations so that countries can better tax them. So all these and ensuring that there's data so that governments are able to see how much profit is made within their jurisdiction and what is therefore lawfully taxable. So there is some momentum that has been built up through those measures, including the commitment of support by the Secretary General. What is really needed is for other regions, particularly developing countries, but also the global north regions, to support those processes and pass this resolution so that the process of negotiating a UN tax convention can begin, especially because of the flaws within the BEPS process. Loredine, I know time has run out, but just one quick thing. The BEPS process, while it brought in a number of jurisdictions, there are a number of flaws with the deal because analysis has found that the deal in a reallocation of taxing rights actually prioritizes taxing rights to advanced economies. The headquarters of a multinational corporation, for example, very little new revenues will come from it. I think the estimate, for example, on Pillar 1 is maybe only 6 to 15 billion additional revenues globally, but with priority to advanced economies. And Pillar 2 gives a very low minimum tax, for corporate tax, which is even far below what African countries and other developing countries currently have, which are closer to 25 to 35%. So these are the challenges with the BEPS process, and that itself, again, shows why it's important for this taxation negotiations to move to the UN. I will stop now.
Thank you very much, Irene. I know that you are passionate when you talk about this issue, and then also we would always like to listen to your interventions. So unfortunately, we don't have time, and we can spend the whole day discussing this issue. And we know that the report is tackling a lot of wide areas of issues, but unfortunately, we don't have time for that. So what I will be doing is I will open the floor. We'll take 2 or 3 questions from the floor here, and then we'll ask the moderator, the panelists to respond to those questions. So the floor is open for whoever wants to take it. So please be concise when you ask the question. Yes, ITU.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for giving me the floor. I just wanted to ask, I think it was the second panelist that talked about the mobile industry meeting the sort of limit when it comes to taxation. And I wasn't very clear whether that was a recommendation in terms of additional taxation for mobile industry. And I just wanted to know what the panelists had in mind when it comes to taxation vis-a-vis the mobile industry in African countries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll take another question. Okay, I see none. So maybe, Mr. Paul, could you address this question? So about the taxation of the mobile industry.
I think when I was mentioning the mobile telecom, I was saying that I was indicating that that is an area where governments are taxing, And I was trying to bring the disparity between areas where they are traditionally taxing and those which are not. For example, the fintech area. There's a lot of fintech activity going on in Africa, also agri-tech, health tech, which is not being taxed. And there is a need for them to focus on that. So it's not that the mobile was being overtaxed or undertaxed or not being taxed at all. Very much it is part of government revenue.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't see any hands raised. So I will try to summarize very briefly the issues highlighted during this panel discussion. So we've heard from the experiences of Rwanda about the reforms that the country have put in place in terms of taxation, and then the issue of the fiscal incentives, and then how those incentives are earmarked to objectives where the country can assess if the companies are really doing whatever they intended to do when they ask for those incentives. And then the reform of the financial market system, the commodity exchange, and all those reforms when it's linked to the investment code, the repatriation of profits, and all the reforms related to the sovereign wealth funds. And then the issue was also highlighted about the critical role of public-private partnerships, and then we've heard some examples on how the country is doing. The issue of de-risking also was highlighted, and how those tools were used to attract private sector, and then the issue of the integrated financial management systems introduced in the countries, and then highlighting the issue of the transparency, especially linked to the external borrowing, and then how those borrowing are targeting the protective sector. So also we've heard about the importance of creating linkages when it comes to tax incentives, creating linkages to the economy and then the development objectives of the country, and then also the need of putting borrowing for local firms to reduce the interest rate, so they will be able to compete with firms coming from outside. The issue of pension fund and the regulation also is an important aspect that was highlighted, especially when it comes to the implementation of the CFTA and the need for harmonizing the pension fund regulation. I think that's a very important recommendation that we've got from this panel discussion. Also, we've heard from our panelists on the need to have the right mix between leadership and also the kind of partnership that the country should put in place in building trust, the social contract, and so on. The issue also was highlighted about the need for more capacity for countries. Again, the issue of transparency came back, linked to the spending of public funds, and then also the commitment of African countries towards their own development, so they need to achieve those commitments. Finally, also the issue of IFF was mentioned, the need for having a deep discussion about this issue, and then the issue of the forums where IFF are discussed are not inclusive enough. And we've heard about the recent development when it comes to the UN Tax Convention and the resolution that was adopted at the second committee, and then the need also for having a wider advocacy about the need to pass this this resolution at the General Assembly. So briefly, these are the key issues that were discussed. I know that we cannot make justice to this, but we've tried our best. So with this, Chair, I give you the floor.
I thank Mr. Liwadin Feliz for moderating the panel discussion and for the important summary of our debate he has just made. I also extend my thanks to the panelists for sharing their perspectives and country experiences on the important issues raised in the report. Excellencies, distinguished delegates and participants, let me thank you all for attending today's launch of OSAA's 2022 flagship report. I hope you found this event informative and pertinent, and we hope to encourage further discussions on the topic of Africa's financing for development and domestic resource mobilization going forward. I am especially grateful for the panelists who participated in this event and the African group for their continued support. Should we have more time, I'm sure that more comments would have been made, and I would like to ask all those who have their comments to send them in writing to us. Let me recognize the invaluable substantive contribution to the report made by the soundboard, including peer review various drafts. The members are for the NDI, former UN resident coordinator in Rwanda, Rogers Dilwayo, economic advisor at UNDP South Africa Country Office, Florence Nazare, head of Centers of Excellence Management and Coordination at Auda, Nepad, and Abiba Ben Barka, Senior Economic Affairs Officer at UNCTAD. I also wish to acknowledge the important role played by members of OSAA's Africa Knowledge Network for their constructive comments and inputs, starting from the conceptualization phase. These are Professor Annette Ogutu, Ms. Laila Abdul Latifa, Professor Yvette Rachel Elongo, Ms. Joy Ndubai, Professor Tia Waris, Mr. Alexander Ezenagu, and Ms. Aren Ovonji Odida, who spoke just a while ago. Special thanks to colleagues from the UN organizations who contributed to the report, including RCOs in Cape Verde and Namibia, DESA, and the IMF. I would like to acknowledge our team at OSAA that worked on this report, Mr. Kavazewa Kajumuis, Liwadin Flis, Rui Shu, and Utuku Texas, with the inputs from Bitsat, Ioannis Kasaum, and Mafizul Islam, among others. Thanks to colleagues at OSA's front office for their vital and vibrant administration support throughout report preparation and production, including Maria Teresa Aranas, Michelle Douglas Romani, Mary Newmo, and Jorge Vasquez Costa. We also thank DJICM for the design and layout support and for providing interpretation services. We thank all of you for your presence and all the contributors to this very important work and the report that we have launched today. Thank you very much, and I declare this meeting adjourned.